Welcome to the Black Belt Husband Podcast. I'm your host, Quentin Hafner, licensed therapist, thought leading expert for men, and the creator of the Black Belt Husband System. This podcast exists for one reason: to train men to win in the one relationship that matters most, their marriage. If your relationship feels distant, if you're walking on eggshells, if nothing you've tried is working, you're not a failure, you just don't have the right blueprint. Inside this podcast, you'll learn the mindsets, tools, and frameworks to lead your home with strength, create peace in your marriage, and win back your wife's admiration and desire. Black Belt Husband is the step-by-step path to reclaim your power and transform your relationship. Let's get started. Welcome, everybody, to the Black Belt Husband Podcast. And today we are going to talk about a really hard topic. We're going to talk about the should I stay or should I go scenario. And we want to help people that are really struggling in their marriage find clarity on what is, for most people, the hardest decision of their life. And that's whether they should stay in their marriage or whether they should leave their marriage. This is something that we talk to our clients about so much. So we just wanted to record an episode, give you some thoughts on how we help our clients kind of analyze this decision. And yeah, we have so much to say. So before we jump in, I just want to take a second to acknowledge the people that might be in this scenario. Should I stay or should I go? And what we know is that this is the hardest place for people to be in. And if you're in this place, we want you to know, number one, that you're not alone. And we also want you to know that you're not crazy for wanting to figure out the answer to this decision. This is often the most difficult, the most confusing place that people will ever find themselves in the story of their life. One day they feel exhausted, they feel stuck, they feel like they just want to get out of their relationship. It totally feels hopeless. And then a day later, they have totally different feelings and they feel like, oh, well, I think I should try to make this work. And I wonder if if we just went to marriage counseling, maybe it could be better. And I feel guilty for even thinking about wanting to leave. And so there's such a complexity of, thoughts and feelings and behaviors. And so when we meet people that are in this decision, what the thing that we kind of stand on is that we're not here to tell people what they should do. We're not here to say, oh, you should stay married, or we're not here to say, oh, you should leave your relationship. We're here to give people the guidance and the tools to help them make an informed decision, to help them analyze the decision using kind of like tried and true kind of markers and different litmus tests to really look at this decision in a thoughtful way and to not look at it in an impulsive or an emotional way, because typically when we look at it through like an emotional way or an impulsive way, it's very easy to make the wrong decision. So that's where we're coming from. That's what we're going to talk about today, and we're so glad you're tuning in and you're listening.
Yeah, absolutely, Quentin. I think this is just such an important topic, and that's not really talked about enough. And I think that's really our heart, is just to create a safe space to have an honest conversation about something that a lot of people are quietly suffering through. So, yeah, just as, if you're listening to this and any of this hits home, just, take it in. We'll have some steps at the end. But jumping right in, Quentin, why do you think this is one of the most difficult choices that, someone in this situation will ever have to make?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I think, just there's a couple levels that we could look at answering that question. So like we could look at it on a practical level, and we can look at it on like a spiritual, emotional level. So on a practical level, it's the most difficult decision that people will ever make because the implications of the decision are so big. So for example, if my marriage is, totally dead and totally lifeless, well, if I stay in that marriage, those are really big implications. I am resigning myself to a lifetime of dissatisfaction, drudgery, misery, whatever we want to call that. On the other hand, if my marriage, if I need to leave my marriage, and I need to exit my marriage on a practical level, well, there's a lot of big implications on that
Mm.
too. So, what's going to happen to my financial life? What's going to happen to my lifestyle? How are my kids going to fare? What will my, legacy be? Will that change? Will my kids, hate me? What about like my in-law relationships? What are going to happen to those? I mean, there's so many practical implications. And then on the emotional side, what makes this decision so difficult is because it's a very tormenting decision because or it's a very tormenting place to be with not knowing how to make the decision because it's it's very confusing, because there's really two camps of thought out there when it comes to people in this decision. So one camp of thinking is that you're going to find people that are, going to really push you to stay in your marriage. They're going to say, divorce is wrong. You shouldn't get a divorce. You should stay married at any cost. You should try to make it work. You should really lean into that way of thinking. And then there's other people that are not going to think that way. They're going to say, hey, you only live once, you should live your best life. If you're not happy, you should leave. And they're gonna try to persuade you or convince you to, kind of follow your feelings and kind of go in that direction. And so what I've experienced is that, the truth is that both of those narratives around what to do are wrong. And what we like to do, what we like to help our clients find is that space in the middle that is a lot more methodical, a lot more thoughtful, a lot more the truth is the thinking is a lot more complex because we just don't want people to make the wrong decision. So people end up getting, what happens for people in this situation is that they end up getting paralyzed in indecision and they stay and they stay and they stay and they stay and the marriage isn't working and they're too afraid to get a divorce, but they're also too hopeless to try to go work on the relationship. So they just stay stuck in the middle and years go by and sometimes decades go by and they, are just feeling, totally stuck and lifeless. And so for all those reasons, this life decision is one of the most difficult that people will ever make. Does that kind of make sense, Lucas, the way I'm kind of answering that?
Yeah, I think it totally makes sense, and you're really hitting it on a multidimensional level because there's practical, there's relational, there's emotional things, and I mean to me it makes sense why, someone would feel stuck because that's super overwhelming and scary to have to figure that out. You throw a couple kids in there, you throw some net worth, maybe you own a house or two, not to mention your reputation. And even what I've seen as people get older, they're a little concerned about being lonely.
Yeah, and for all those reasons, and there's like a big identity piece too that I think a lot of people really struggle with. It's like, my identity has always been, to be a husband and a father. Well, now
Right.
my identity is like being a single man, and it's like I don't really like that. That doesn't feel congruent with how I see myself. And so there's a big identity shift. And for all the for for so many reasons, people get stuck in what I call the ambivalence of should I
Mm,
stay or should I go? And they're just totally ambivalent. It's like, well, they have one foot in and they want have one foot out. They're not really pursuing on trying to fix the relationship and they're not committed to ending the relationship. And so they are just kind of like dying on the vine and
yeah.
dying a slow death.
And that's brutal.
It's so
And,
brutal.
and it's brutal. And at Black Belt Husband, we want you to be happy and we want you to have a happy, healthy marriage. Um, Okay, so if happiness, compatibility, and being in love, if those necessarily aren't the right measuring sticks, like you were just sharing a little bit about, and the common reasons why this decision is so hard,
Mhm.
what you're talking about taking more of an analytical approach, less of an emotional approach. What are some of the key things that if you're in this situation that you really need to be looking at?
Yeah, so we have these what we call these common myths of relationship dissatisfaction, and the reason I call them myths is because There are things that people say to try to help them make sense of why the relationship isn't working, but they're actually not the reason themselves why the relationship isn't working. So we can go through, there's three big ones, okay? And so these are the things that people say when if you were going to ask somebody like, oh, like, why did you get a divorce or why did you end the relationship? These are the common three things that people say. Okay. So number one, people say, I'm not happy or I wasn't happy, and then therefore I should go. Number two, the common thing that people say is that we aren't compatible or we weren't compatible. So I left the relationship. And then the third thing that is very common that you hear people say is that we just weren't in love anymore. And so the relationship ended. So I'm not happy, we're not compatible, and then I'm not in love. And so if you're listening to this podcast and you are in a relationship that isn't working, I bet that you could resonate or relate to one of those three, or maybe all three of those sentiments. I'm not happy anymore. It doesn't feel like we're compatible anymore. And I'm just not in love. So, because one of those three things are present, or maybe all three of those things are present, people start to think like, okay, well, maybe this relationship is doomed. Maybe this relationship isn't supposed to work. Maybe it is time to exit the relationship. And so what we like to do is we like to say, okay, those three things that are very common for people to express, like, and if we know that those are not like the real things, okay, those are the topical things that people say at a very kind of like surface level, but we're always wondering like, well, what are the real reasons that the marriage isn't working? What are the deeper reasons why the marriage isn't working? And and so what we want to show people is we want to show people these other things to look at. Okay, these other things to look at, and we can like think of these things as like these are the things about how to really get clarity for what's going on in the relationship. Okay, and so when it comes to looking at happiness, so when people say that I'm not happy in a relationship anymore, what we show our clients is we do this assessment of like relationship non-negotiables. Okay. So things like loyalty, respect, companionship, support, affection, a sense of freedom. These are relationship non-negotiables. And the reason we like to show clients these non-negotiables is because when people talk about relationships, they're not happy anymore. The concept of happiness is such a vague idea that it's very difficult for people to pinpoint. Well, it's like, why are you unhappy? And so if you say, well, why are you unhappy? A lot of people don't really have a clear answer to that question. It's just more of this kind of like pervasive feeling that exists. And so what we want to do is we want to show people the exact reasons why they're discontent, why they're not happy. And that's why we do this thing in our assessment. We show people the non-negotiables, because once people can identify like, oh, that non-negotiable is missing in my relationship, and that's the reason why I'm not feeling so great. And then it brings up another question. Well, is that non-negotiable solvable? What have you done to try to like sort out that non-negotiable, and have you done it and gone about it in a way that's really effective? Because it now, instead of looking at happiness, which is this really overarching vague idea, when we look at non-negotiables, we are approaching the should I stay or should I go question with this like exact precision, instead of like something that feels really vague, like the concept of happiness.
Yeah, I really like that concept of non-negotiables. I think it really takes out the emotional charge, and I think it really brings back more to like a value-based decision.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so what's
Mm-hmm.
one way if someone's listening to this right now and this is really resonating, and maybe this concept of non-negotiables is new to them and it's just a new word, a new idea? Um, what's one way that someone practically can measure if those non-negotiables are present in their marriage?
Well, I think the starting place for people when it comes to non-negotiables is, do people really know what their non-negotiables are?
Mhm.
And so if you're listening to this and you're kind of like, well, I kind of know what they are, or yeah, I'm pretty sure I know what they are, then I would just say, okay, write down your top five relationship non-negotiables in ranked priority order. So what is the number one non-negotiable? And this is kind of like a filtering tool. It's like a filtering test. It's like, hey, if this thing is present, I just know that the relationship cannot work. And what I have found when I ask people to do this, it becomes a pretty difficult exercise because people don't have that master clarity around what their non-negotiables really are. And when you are forced to write them down and even put them in ranked order, it becomes a little bit of a challenging thought exercise because it kind of forces us to get to know ourselves. It forces us to learn about ourselves. Like, well, what really is important to you? And it's like you only get five, right? It's like you can't
Mhm.
write down 10 or 20. It's like, what are the top five in ranked order? And then what happens is when people start to do this exercise, they start to get master clarity on what these non-negotiables are, and then they can see more specifically and more clearly like, oh, okay, well, I see that this non-negotiable is kind of there but kind of not there. Oh, this non-negotiable is completely missing, it's not there at all. Oh, this non-negotiable is definitely present in my relationship, so some are there, some are 50% there, some are not there at all. And then it gives people kind of more of like a concrete framework to work with to say, okay, well, you know, like I alluded to earlier, like if I was going to stay in my marriage, are is this thing fixable? Is it not fixable? What have I done to fix it? And so we're just trying to help people get out of these kind of like vague concepts like happiness, which is like so hard to pin down and identify like what that really is, getting them to look at the non-negotiables. And the best starting
Mm.
place for people to do that is just to write them down, top five in ranked order, and start to play with them in your mind to see, what's really there.
Totally makes sense. Great exercise. I would encourage you guys, even you're listening after this podcast, grab a piece of paper, do it, look at those non-negotiables. And it reminds me too of, pillar number one in the black belt husband process, right? Being the leader of the relationship. And this is really a leadership exercise. And you're taking a stand, you're figuring out what's important to you, what your values are, and you're writing that down and then communicating it.
Yeah, it's also in alignment with pillar number three in our black belt husband system, which is being intolerant of bad behavior. Because a lot of guys, because of their conflict avoidance and their passivity, they have allowed a lot of bad behavior to exist inside of their relationship that they know is a non-negotiable inside of themselves, but they've never really addressed it. Maybe they've created some resentment around it, or they've gotten angry about it, or they've become passive aggressive about it, but they've never really addressed it in like a really healthy way by like, developing clear standards and having healthy boundaries. And so when they start to write down the non-negotiables, and then the follow-up question to the non-negotiables is like, well, what have you done to make sure that those non-negotiables are kind of like firing on all cylinders, so to speak, inside of your relationship? They're kind of like, well, I actually haven't really done much of anything with them at all. I've just kind of like complained about them a little bit. I've gotten snarky over the years when they've been violated. But it's like, okay, well, what if you addressed those non-negotiables? What if you really treated those non-negotiables as if they were true non-negotiables? Like they are not negotiable. Like these are lines in the sand, and these are stakes in the ground that I will live by. And then a lot of guys, when we're in that conversation with them, if they're being honest, they're kind of like, yeah, I haven't really treated it like that,
Yeah. Haven't treated like that and don't know how to.
and don't know
And
how to.
and
Yeah.
now we totally get it. It's scary, right? It's scary to stand up for something that you've accepted for 5, 10, maybe 20 plus years and go, I don't think this is working for me anymore.
And the other thing too is that just kind of like along those lines is that, what we know statistically about, divorce rates for first marriages, second marriages, and third marriages is that if you're listening to this podcast and like maybe you're that guy that's like, passive and conflict avoidant, and maybe there's non-negotiables that you have allowed to happen inside of your relationship, and then you're kind of thinking, you know what, I'm so unhappy with my wife that I'm really contemplating a divorce. And then like statistically we know this to be 100% true, is that you would get a divorce and that you would go to another marriage and the same exact dynamic would exist, because the problem wasn't inside your marriage. The problem was inside of us, in me, about my difficulty being, conflict avoidant, and my people pleasing tendencies. And so if I don't work on those, it doesn't really matter what relationship I'm in. That is like that old cliche, wherever you go, there you are. And you're going to find yourself with those same problematic relational tendencies. And having a new partner won't solve that, unfortunately.
If only it was that easy.
If it only was that easy. Yeah.
Oh
Yeah.
man. And I think, you make a good point here of, you know, establishing, figuring out what your values are. Because if you don't know what your values are, you're not going to know what to stand up for. And a lot of times behind these, if you're already prone to be conflict avoidant and you don't have any values, it's like you're double stuck because you don't know what you're going to stand up for.
Exactly, exactly. And so, this is a great kind of segue into the second thing that we really we really love people helping people kind of assess for when they're in the should I stay or should I go scenario. And that's really just, we call that values alignment. So the first thing we help people with is understanding what their non-negotiables are. And that the point of that is to get out of the happiness conversation,
Mhm.
and to get something that looks a little bit more kind of pinpoint. And so that's what so in order to get out of that, we look at non-negotiables. And then so the second thing that we look at is values alignment. And the reason we look at values alignment is because we want to get out of that incompatibility conversation, because a lot of people say, "Oh, we were just incompatible." Okay. So I always use this analogy to explain the myth of incompatibility. So if you're listening to this podcast, I want you to hear me say, I want you to hear this from me, is that people do not get divorced because of incompatibility. Now, people say that all the time. I understand that people say that. But the truth is, according to research on divorce and marital satisfaction, incompatibility is not a factor. Okay. And my example to kind of show that is like, okay, so if if I met my wife, we were both single, and I met her because I loved to play tennis and she loved to play tennis, and we got married. And then over time in our marriage, she still loved to play tennis, but I moved on to playing golf. And so we were in compatibility with our recreational time. Well, if that was a great reason, or even a reason that made sense to get a divorce, well, like everybody would be divorced. Everybody would be miserable inside their marriage, because the thing that is a guarantee inside relationships is that over time people are going to change, and the things that we were compatible with are going to be things that we're not compatible with in the future. Like that is a known thing that is going to change. And I use the golf and tennis analogy just to kind of like simplify the point, to make it see, just to show you that incompatibility is not the real driver. And what is the real driver for pain? Because when people are in the should I stay or should I go scenario, they're always in a ton of pain. Is that it's not a incompatibility issue. It's always a misaligned values problem. Okay. And so what people need so and it goes back to, the question that we always ask our clients we say, okay, well, what are your values? What are your core values? Like, what are Quentin's core values? And what are Quentin's wife core values? And show them, I want to see that on paper, because I want to see where there is value alignment and where there is value misalignment. Oftentimes, whenever there is pain or conflict or disconnection associated in a relationship, if we really look closely, we will always see that there is value misalignment. Okay. Now, some value misalignment can be reconciled because, like, philosophically, no two people share their same values at all. But And then some value misalignment cannot be reconciled. So it really depends on where is their value misalignment, how big is the gap of value misalignment, and just like in when we were looking at the non-negotiables, we are looking at this stuff with like laser precision to see like, oh, okay, well, you guys have like big value misalignment on how you think you should spend time with extended family members. Okay. Or you have big value misalignment on your relationship with money, or you have like 50% value misalignment. And if you did this, 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 and then you know, you guys could be, you would be in much better shape. And also realizing, I swear I'm going to be quiet in a second. I just feel like I'm on this roll of like, I don't want to miss this
No,
point.
keep going, keep going.
I want people to hear too that there's even a sub layer that's deeper than values misalignment, and that is the emotions that we feel when there's value misalignment. So, at a very top level, people say that they're incompatible. At the secondary level, we look at values. And on the third level, the deepest level is like, well, when there is value misalignment, when it comes to how we spend money or how we save money, how does that make people feel? And then do people have the tools to process that emotion with each other?
Mm.
Because if we don't have the tools to process that emotion with each other, we're always going to be stuck.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter what relationship we're going to be in. No two people agree on how to spend money, how to save money, or how to have a healthy sex life, or how to be parents, or how
Mhm.
to spend time with friends, or what their faith life looks like. Like no two people like walking the planet totally agree on all those things. So we have to know how to process the emotion when those things become, out of alignment with each other. Does that make sense the way I'm thinking about that?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think you're bringing up a really good point that a lot of people are probably going to resonate with, but might not connect the dots. And so maybe we could give a little. I don't know if you have a specific example we could give, but what yeah, like just kind of want to digest that, unpack that a little bit more. How would one of our listeners, or if this is resonating with someone, how can they go from recognizing, okay, again, it's not about necessarily compatibility. Maybe they're starting to, see some of their values, but how do they really like, what's an example of like those deep feelings that are really starting to come up that maybe they feel, but they're too scared to share, or they don't know how to share it, or um, yeah, does that make
Perfect.
sense?
Yeah. No, no,
Make sense?
totally. Yeah. I can give, I'll give like a little exercise that people can do that are listening to this. So, take a piece of paper and make three columns. Okay. And on the far left column, just like when we were talking about non-negotiables, tell me what your five core values are, just you as a person listening to this. What are your five core values? And put them in ranked priority order. And some people listening to this are going to say, well, what does that even mean? What are my core values? And we won't go into it on this podcast because this is not the point of this show, but just Google it, just type in, how to discover your core values. And there's a ton of stuff on the internet. Okay. So come up with your five core values in ranked order. And then in the second column, I want you to ask yourself this question: how have I felt when there was misalignment with my spouse regarding that core value? So if one of my core values, let's say, is the word freedom, that happens to be one of Quentin's core values. So if one of my core values is freedom, how does it make me feel when I don't feel like I'm getting enough freedom? Okay. So what is the feeling word there? So it might be, scared, hurt, sad, angry, anxious, whatever that is. Okay. So, and then on the third column, I want you to ask yourself the question: what have you done with that feeling? Like, how have you behaviorally reacted to that feeling? So, what's the core value? How does missing that core value make you feel? And then how have you acted in response to that feeling? So the response could be like, well, I just got quiet, or I get rebellious, or I shut down, or I get angry. What is the behavioral response? And the reason I love taking clients to that exercise is because I want them to see that like a lot. there's so many things that could happen in that exercise. So number one, what can happen is that people just don't even know what their core values are. And if you're listening to this and that's you, don't judge yourself. I would say for most of my adult life, I didn't even know what that term even meant. Okay, and then someone introduced me to it. I'm like, okay, great. This is a really great concept. This is these little simple tools to help us gain more self-awareness. So a lot of people won't even know what their core values are. And then in the second column, a lot of people won't, they'll have a hard time putting words, they'll have a hard time putting emotional words to what those are. And if that's you, again, don't beat yourself up. It's totally normal, but we want to learn that stuff. We want to learn what is the emotion going on inside my nervous system when those core values are missing. And then on the last one, people are typically pretty aware of like, how have I responded behaviorally when that's been missing? And what they see in that is like, oh my gosh, my behavior kind of sucks. Like I got sulky, I got pouty, I got really angry, I got defensive, I just shut down and got quiet, or, whatever I did in a negative way. And then they see like, okay, well, that is like stuff for me to work on that really has nothing to do with the relationship, because ideally we all want to be able to respond in a super healthy way. And when people write that down, they typically realize that they have a lot of work to do on their emotional management and emotional responses.
Mm. And it really highlights pillar number 4 in the black belt husband process of taking responsibility for your side of the road. Right?
Exactly. So
Right.
true.
You can
Yes.
take responsibility for what your values are. You can take responsibility and have self-awareness around how you're feeling. And then you can take responsibility for your actions. You can actually totally start to change what you're going through on your own without your spouse doing anything.
Exactly. Exactly. And then what, I mean, and we've seen this, happen so many times in you guys that have gone through our program, is that once they start taking responsibility for their side of the street, start taking responsibility for their values, their non-negotiables, how they're showing up, then what happens is the relationship starts to slowly shift. And, of course, it's not a guarantee. It doesn't mean that the relationship is going to, shift for the better. It typically shifts, and it gives people more clarity on answering the question, should I stay or should I go? But if your side of the street is really messy, how are you really going to answer that question in a considerate, thoughtful way, given the implications of what's behind the question, right? Like, what I mean by that is like the consequences to either staying in a dead marriage and living a life of misery. We don't want to do that. That sucks. And we also don't want to prematurely end the relationship because there's such a big fallout. So I always point this out to people. I say, okay, before you make the decision, whether it's to stay or whether it's to go, if you, let's just work on your side of the street, because you got to do that anyway. And what
Mhm.
happens with a lot of people is once they start doing that, they start to get tons of clarity on answering the original question, should I stay or should I go?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. So we have, we're talking about looking beyond happiness, going to that deeper level, looking at your core values, the non-negotiables. And we also have something that we call wild cards, you know. Do you want to start, want to break down what some of those wild cards are and why that's so important to this process?
Yeah, the wild cards are the third pillar of doing the should I stay or should I go analysis. And we use an acronym, we call it MAP, and it's MAAAP. And the acronym stands for motivation, addiction, abuse, affair, or professional help. Okay, so MAAAP. And what we what we do when we're doing the should I stay or should I go analysis for people is that we want to offer people, again, a more sophisticated way to analyze this question, should I stay or should I go, that goes beyond the third common myth that people say, and that is we're just not in love anymore. And so when I ask people, I say, okay, like you're not in love anymore. And so like what does that really mean? What does that feel like? Or like how did you come to that conclusion? And when did you fall out of love? And what was it like to be in love? And what is it like to not be like? So what people realize is that just like happiness and just like compatibility, the concept of like being in love gets very vague. And I don't want anybody to make such a big life decision with that kind of ambiguity and that kind of like vagueness. And so to eliminate the vagueness, what we're doing in this, the third pillar of this process is we are looking at five categories. Okay. So the first category is that we're looking at motivation and we're asking how motivated is partner A and partner B to be successfully married. Sometimes you have two people that are motivated, sometimes you have zero people that are motivated, and sometimes you have one person that's motivated and one person that's not motivated. And so, depending on those three different kind of like ratios, we're going to do something a little bit different and we're going to analyze it in a different way depending on how motivated people are. So, we have to look at motivation. As you can imagine, if one person's like, I'll do anything to save my relationship. And then the other person's like, I've already filed for divorce. Like if one person is completely not motivated to work on the relationship, then it's going to be very difficult to stay. But this is where it gets really nuanced because the truth is nobody is 0% motivated or 100% motivated. We're
Mm.
always working with people that are like, I'm 27% motivated and my wife is 63% unmotivated. It's like, okay, well then like, so we have to really break that down and we have to help people, understand like what's going to move the needle when it comes to motivation. The next three categories, I'm just going to kind of lump them together. So addiction, abuse, and affairs. These are I'm going to just call them relationship traumas. Okay. So these are the things that if one of these three things or all three or two out of three, if any of these three things are present for someone that's in the should I stay or should I go analysis, these are the things that we have to look at first and foremost before we do anything else. Okay, so if there's like an active addiction going on in the relationship, that active addiction has to get addressed in order for us to answer the should I stay or should I go question. So we help people and we give people tools and frameworks to look at that. Same if there's like any kind of like physical abuse. Now that's pretty rare in our scenario. We don't work with people that are in domestic violence situations. Typically, it's like such an outlier. But for someone listening to this, if you're in a relationship where that's present, just want you to know that like you can't be in it's like don't worry about trying to answer the should I stay or should I go question until that is solved. Affairs, we do work with people that are in affairs. Okay, it's very common for us to work with clients who are having an affair, had an affair, or on the cusp of having an affair, and so that is another one of those things that has to get dealt with before we are really analyzing the should I stay or should I go question. As you can imagine, it's if somebody's kind of wondering if they should stay or if they should go, but they're currently in an active affair, well, that active affair is going to be very clouding to their decision making and to their judgment on what to do with their marriage. So we want to look at that first, and then we help people analyze the second should I stay or should I go, and the last letter of the acronym MAP is P, and that stands for professional help. So we want to know from people like if you're in the should I stay or should I go question mark in your mind, we want to know what have you done to try to like help the relationship. Have you worked with a therapist, and what kind of therapist did you work with, because not all therapists are created equal, and how long were you working with that person? Did you see some sign of life, some progress? It's very common in our program that we get people that were like they went to therapy, but the therapist had no idea what they were doing on helping people in the should I stay or should I go scenario. So that wasn't really helpful. Or maybe they've bounced around to different marriage counselors, or they saw the pastor at their church. And so we just want to know like what has kind of like happened in the way of professional help, because that's going to help. Because the opposite is true. Like sometimes we get clients, they're like, well, you know, we've been going to therapy, with really legit marriage people for the last 20 years. And like our relationship is just getting worse. And it's like, okay, well, that's going to help inform us to answering the question, should I stay or should I go? So we just want to look at that as a category. And so MAP, MAAP, it stands for motivation, addiction, abuse, affairs, professional help. And that also, just like the other two pillars, we're getting into that precision analysis instead of just vague concepts like we have fallen out of love.
Yeah, those five things are super helpful. And honestly, I haven't seen any other frameworks that just point out those five things and how important they are. But quick question, you've spent thousands of hours coaching men and even, some women in this scenario. Which one of these five, real deal breakers have you seen as being the most common one? And how does that affect the decision-making process?
Yeah, I think in our kind of world, the clients that we work with, the affairs
Mm,
category is probably and I don't want to say it's a deal breaker because it's definitely not a deal breaker at all. It's just the one that we see the most. Um, it's the one that adds a layer of complexity to the should I stay or should I go kind of
mm,
analysis. And it's often the thing that even evokes the should I stay or should I go question mark for a lot of people. Um, Especially, and
yeah.
it's not, this is not like a gender specific thing because this definitely happens to a lot of the women that we work with too. But a lot of guys that we work with, what happens is they meet somebody and they start an affair, and the affair makes them actually feel so good. I mean, there's a duality of the emotion because they feel guilty and they feel a tremendous amount of shame, but they also feel a lot of life, and they might feel things that they haven't felt in a very long time. It kind of breathes kind of new life into them, and that new positive feeling often evokes this question, well, should I stay or should I go?
Hmm.
And so, if you're listening to this and you're kind of in that category, just like, I mean, the first thing I want you to know is you're not alone. There's, literally, tens of thousands of guys out there in the exact same situation right now. But if you want help in answering that question, reach out to us because this is kind of like the thing that we do. We love helping people figure out. And this is like one of the things about affairs too, is that a lot of people miss this is that like, because of course, in our culture, we have, kind of a negative reaction to affairs. It's a betrayal, there's a morality thing in it. But what a lot of people don't see with affairs is that an affair often illuminates what is missing for people in their marriage that without the affair, they wouldn't have been able to see or to know. And so in that sense, an affair can be a tremendous gift to a marriage if the affair could be overcome, if the affair could be healed from, because there's nothing like the affair that will show a relationship where it's
Hmm.
degraded, where it's broken down. Because when people have affairs, they end up having affairs with people to try to get the thing that was missing inside of their relationship.
And that it totally makes sense. And, even in these conversations that we have with our clients, it usually is a painful but illuminating process of being honest.
Yeah. So, if you're listening to this, again, first of all, no shame. We don't,
Of course.
you know, we want, like I said in the beginning, when it comes to like the should I stay or should I go scenario, we just want people to make a really good decision one way or the other.
Yep.
And what we know is that the worst place that people can be is in the indecision, is in no decision at all. And that's the ambivalence. And so we want to help people get out of the ambivalence. And we want to help people either, discover like, is there more life to be had inside of your marriage? And what if we doubled down and we worked on changing that? Or is there no life to be had in your marriage and we just need to make a really hard decision to end it? And so either way, we want people to make a decision because the worst place to be is to make no decision.
Yeah, it really
And
is.
yeah, okay, sorry. Were you going to say something there, Lucas?
Well, I think you're hitting on a really good point, which is the kind of the final pillar in this or step in this process. But instead of you might feel like should I stay or should I go, but what should they really be asking? How can they reframe that question, and maybe how could we help them with that?
Yeah. Yeah. And so, okay, so that's great. So if I think that um, if you are in this place, okay, and you want to know if this is, if they're, if we can be, if we can be helpful to you and you're in this place, there's a couple things I want you to know. Number one is that this is kind of our, this is our business. This is our like expertise. This is something we help people a lot with. So we just want you to know like you're not alone in it. Okay. And we have an awesome assessment, okay, that we give our clients. It's an 85 question diagnostic assessment for people that are in the should I stay or should I go camp, okay? And it's a questionnaire, and it's basically you just answer these questions. There's 85 of them, and there are 85 questions that are all geared around those three pillars that we just kind of like went through. Doing the non-negotiables, doing the value alignment, and then looking at the map. And so we have this 85 question assessment. And what people realize, typically what's very common is that people take the assessment and then we walk people through the assessment. When people get walked through the assessment and we show people the kind of results, what people almost always realize is they have this light bulb moment and they go, "Oh, I know exactly where I need to go. I either need to go left or I need to go right." And the assessment has a real beautiful, magical way of like kind of jumping people out of the ambivalence. So if you want access to that assessment, wherever you're listening to this podcast, find our email address or DM us somewhere. Let us know that you want access to this assessment, and we'll send it to you. And you can start your own process of answering the question, should I stay or should I go? Because like I said before, we just want to help people get out of the ambivalence. We just want to help people make good decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. And the assessment, it's amazing. It's a 25-page PDF report. It breaks it all down. Then you also have the option to, book a one-on-one consultation with Quentin or myself, and we'll walk you through that as well.
Yes, sir. Okay. So I guess unless you have anything else, Lucas, I think we're kind of getting close to the hour mark. Should I stay or should I go? Anything else you want to add before we hit pause?
I'll just, closing remarks. If this resonates and this podcast is hitting home, it's for a reason. You're listening today. Please reach out to us. We'd love just to even have a quick chat and how we can support you through this.
Absolutely. Okay. Thanks for listening, guys. Chat soon. Thanks for tuning in to the Black Belt Husband podcast. If today's episode gave you a new insight or a challenge to raise your standard, do me a favor. Subscribe, leave a review, and share it with another man who's ready to lead stronger at home. Your marriage doesn't change by accident. It changes because you show up leading different. Keep going, and I'll see you inside the next episode.